My guess is there were a bunch of people that thought, "Aw," after they watched that video. Yet the truth is, all of us know the consequences of fear in our life. We know the fear of making a decision that'll impact our future. We know the fear of what other people will think. Well, what will they do? What will they do because of what I do? The fear of my future and how I'm going to protect that. And all these fears just have tremendous consequences in our lives. Some of you fear being poor because you grew up poor and you're never going to be poor again. So that fear drives you to work more than you should, and you pay the price relationally. Some of us fear intimacy, and because of that, you got hurt when you were younger and you're not going to let that happen again, and so you're afraid. And because of that, you can't connect with people that you want to. Some of us fear being left alone, and because we're afraid of being left alone, when we have anybody that comes into a relationship with us, even as a friend, we begin to smother them relationally to try to hold on to them, and because we smother them relationally, it almost becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. They leave us because they just need to breathe. They're trying to get away from us controlling them. Others of us fear authority. When we're around bad authority in our life, or we just like to control things, we are afraid of being out of control, and so anytime there's authority in our lives, we can't stand it, and so because of that, you can't submit in your marriage. You're afraid of submitting to your wife the way God says there's mutual submission in a marriage, but you can't do that because you're afraid she'll get the upper hand, and your mom had the upper hand on your dad, and you're never going to let that happen to you, and so it affects your relationship. It's clear, I see occasionally with parents in the way that they handle their kids. You're like me, and you want your kids to love you, and you want to have a long-term relationship with them and their kids and the family to be warm and connected, but even when they're growing up, you fear your kids' rejection, and because you fear their rejection and what it's going to mean to you long-term, you see something in their life that needs somebody to address it, but you don't address it because you're afraid that they'll reject you and it'll hurt your relationship, and who knows where that's going to go. And then because you don't address what needs to be addressed, they lose respect for you, which eventually causes them to not want to be around you. Fear has these tremendous outgrowths of complications everywhere in our life. So here's what we're going to do for the next few weeks together. We're going to try to take fear apart, and we're going to try to look at it inside out, and we're going to try to see if God can't help us lead a fearless life. And my guess is over the next 5 weeks as we do this together, there are going to be things that we say, and as soon as we say them, you're going to agree with them. And then there are going to be other things we say that you're going to think, I don't know about that. But here's my prayer. I'm praying in this series that we will allow God to help us put our fear in its rightful place. I'm praying this specifically for men who are afraid that they're not good enough, men that are afraid they're not good enough, men that they're not strong enough, that they're not capable enough, but we'd say we're not afraid of anything. But I'm praying that God will help us put our fear in its rightful place so that we can live the life that God designed us to live, and we can reach the potential that He saw for us when He created us in the beginning. That's what I'm praying. And the great thing about a series on fear is, when you're a person that teaches from the Bible, is that there are there are more than a few examples of where you can turn in the Bible to find examples of people living in fear. Because the majority of heroes in the Bible were fearful people. Almost everyone other than Jesus, we have an example of when they gave in to fear in their life. And the great news is that regardless of how fearful you are, if you allow God to help you get your fear in its right perspective, that God can help you live your life in a great way and can have more impact than you probably think is possible because of what fear is telling you. Now, to start on this, I want to talk to you about what is the primary consequence of fear. I want us to see together what the primary consequence of fear is. And the primary consequence of fear is that we miss opportunities. In fact, if I just said, hey, we're going to take a break in just a minute, I want to give you time to think about it, but in just a moment I'm going to take a break, and we're just going to pass a microphone down starting over on the left side at Madras, and everybody just take a time and tell us about a time when you were afraid of something and it caused you to miss out on an opportunity in life. Almost all of us, would be honest enough, would talk about a time when there was a chance for us to do something and we were afraid of what would happen and how it would impact our future. We were afraid what might be, or we were afraid of what will people think, and so we gave in to our fear and we missed out. It could be financial, it could be relational, it could be something that we missed out on that we knew we had been asked to do, but we couldn't do it because we were just afraid. And we would stand back and we'd say, that fear caused me to miss out on this opportunity. And my fear I gave into, but the opportunity came and the opportunity went, and I just missed. Fear is all about me missing the opportunities in my life. And what I want to do today is I want to show you an account that's from the older part of the Bible. I know the Bible is all old, but this is from the part of the Bible that we call the Old Testament. It's about a guy named Saul, and Saul is the very first king of Israel. Now, if you're not a Bible person, you may not know it, but Israel is the nation that God raised up from one man's family. He was going to be the one through which the Redeemer, that God was going to redeem the world through Israel. So it's God's chosen nation. We just spent a whole series talking about that the last few weeks in God's story. If you weren't here, you might want to catch up on that. But Saul is the very first king. Now, what you might not know is that God did not originally want Israel to have a king. He wanted them to just follow him, but they wanted to be like all the other nations. Every other nation had a king, so they wanted a king, and eventually God gave in and let them have a king, and Saul becomes the first one. Now, from early on, it becomes real apparent Saul's got problems. He follows God some, but he messes up a lot, and almost every time he messes up, it's because he gives in to this thing that rules his life, this fear. And God tries to help him, and God tries to warn him, and God tries to keep him on track, but he continually gives in to his fear. And what I want to show you today is like the final straw. This is the one that finally does it. His fear finally gets the best of him, and it ruins everything. And in this story, there's a principle that we're going to look at, and this principle is at work in your life and in mine. So the story starts with Saul. He's been king for a number of years at this point, and he's done some good, but he has messed up a lot. And him messing up means that there are a growing number of enemies in his country, and so he has to fight a lot. And God is with him in many of the battles, and he wins. In fact, in spite of Saul's fear, he's afraid all the time. Saul is this tremendous military leader, which shows that you can be good in many areas, and people think you're not afraid at all. You appear to be very brave, but the truth is, you're just afraid, and his fear causes him to lead the country in a bad way. Well, on the particular account I want us to look at today, God comes to him and says, Saul, I want you to go and attack this group of people. I'm going to be with you, and you're going to win this battle. But when you win this battle, Saul, I don't want you to bring any plunder back from the battle. No plunder, no spoils of this particular battle. Now, just to make sure you get what God is saying, in that day, and I guess it happens still some today, but not in the same way. You've probably seen this in some kind of medieval kind of TV, something you watch that's about this. In those days, what would happen is an army would go out and fight another tribe, another kingdom, and when they won, they not only would take over the land of the people, they'd also take all the livestock, they'd make slaves of the people, they'd bring the king back to embarrass him, all of these kind of things they take, they were the spoils of war. And of course, the king would get more percentage, but even out of the lowliest soldier, they'd divide up this plunder, and everybody, the kingdom, got a little bit richer. Well, God says to Saul, Saul, I'm going to be with you. We're going to win this battle, and I want everybody to know that it was me, and these people are so evil, I don't want any part of who they are to touch you, so no plunder from this. You don't have to do it because I'm going to take care of you. So got it, Saul? No plunder from this battle. Don't bring back any of the spoils of war. Got it? Yeah, I got it. Let me read to you. This is in 1 Samuel 15, starting in verse 4. Saul summoned the men and mustered them at Telaim, 200,000 foot soldiers and 10,000 men from Judah. Saul went to the city of Amalek and set an ambush in the ravine. Then Saul attacked the Amalekites all the way from Havilah to Shur to the east of Egypt. He took Agag, king of the Amalekites, alive, and all his people he totally destroyed with the sword. But Saul and the army spared Agag and the best of the sheep and cattle, the fat calves and lambs, everything that was good. These they were unwilling to destroy completely, but everything that was despised and weak, that they totally destroyed. Now, Saul has this mentor. He's the one that God used to appoint him king. The guy's name is Samuel, and Samuel continually tries to keep Saul on track. And while Saul has gone off and he's already disobeyed what God asked him to do, God speaks to Samuel. He's a prophet, and he's going to, again, try to keep Saul on track. Here's the next verse. Then the word of the Lord came to Samuel. I am grieved that I have made Saul king, because he's turned away from me, and he has not carried out my instructions. Samuel was troubled, because when God's grieved about something you did, that's not good. Samuel was troubled, and he cried out to the Lord all that night. Early in the morning, Samuel got up and went to meet Saul, but he was told, Saul went to Carmel. There he set up a monument in his own honor, and he turned and has gone down to Gilgal. When Samuel reached him, that's Saul, Saul said, the Lord bless you. Because, of course, Saul thinks everything's great. We had a great victory, just like God said. God was with us, and we won the victory, and we went down and we destroyed the Amalekites. And hey, I went and I set up a monument myself. You had to see it on the way by here. Don't I look good in that monument? Everybody wants to honor me. The Lord bless you, Samuel. I have carried out all the Lord's instructions. But Samuel said, what then is the bleating of sheep in my ears? What's the lowing of cattle that I hear? In other words, if you did everything God asked you to do and you didn't bring back any plunder, what are those sheep over there? And where are those cattle? And who's that fat guy that looks like King Agag? What are they doing here? Listen to what Saul says. The soldiers brought them from the Amalekites. You know what scared people do? You know what they do? Scared people say, well, he, she, they. Scared people start making excuses. You know why it is that some of us have a hard time owning up for our own actions, holding a responsibility for what we did? You know why that is? Because you're afraid. I mean, because you're afraid of something, you can't own your own actions. It's frightened people that have to pass the buck off to somebody else. You're afraid, so you can't say, it was on me. Some of you have been in a relationship with people, and they say that they can't be in a relationship with you anymore because you don't ever admit when you're wrong. And you're thinking to yourself, well, if I'm ever wrong, I'll let you know. You've convinced yourself that you're not wrong because you're afraid of something, and frightened people, they can't own up to their mistakes. The soldiers did it. The soldiers, they brought them back from the Amalekites. The soldiers spared the best of the sheep and the cattle to sacrifice to the Lord your God, but we totally destroyed the rest. Stop, Samuel said to Saul. Let me tell you what the Lord said to me last night. Tell me, Saul replied, because he's thinking, God knows my heart, and I don't know what's in Samuel. Samuel's getting old. Why is he so upset? God knows that I did exactly what he asked me to do. I mean, I went and I won that battle. Samuel said, God said, although you were once small in your own eyes, did you not become the head of the tribes of Israel? The Lord anointed you king over Israel, and he sent you on a mission saying, go and completely destroy these wicked people, the Amalekites. Make war on them until you've wiped them out. Why did you not obey the Lord? Why did you pounce on the plunder and do evil in the eyes of the Lord? And Saul's standing there and he's scratching his head and he's thinking, but I did obey the Lord. Saul said, I went on the mission the Lord assigned me. I completely destroyed the Amalekites. I brought back Agag, their king. The soldiers took the sheep and cattle from the plunder, the best of what was devoted to God, in order to sacrifice unto the Lord your God in Gilgal. But Samuel replied, does the Lord delight in burnt offerings and sacrifices as much as in obeying the voice of the Lord? To obey is better than sacrifice. To heed is better than the fat of rams. For rebellion is like the sin of witchcraft, and arrogance like the evil of idolatry. Because you rejected the word of the Lord, he has rejected you as king. Wow. Then Saul said to Samuel, I have violated the Lord's command and your instructions. Why, Saul? Saul, why did you do it? I was, what's the next word? Afraid. I was afraid of the men, and so I gave in to them. Now I beg you, forgive my sin and come back with me so that I may worship the Lord. But Samuel said to him, I will not go back with you. You've rejected the word of the Lord, and the Lord has rejected you as king over Israel. You know what Saul's problem was? Saul allows his fear to just keep pushing him his whole life long. And in this particular instance, Saul's afraid that if I command the men, they look forward to these battles and going and they get a little richer and they bring something home to their family and they increase their wealth and they'll go fight. I'm just afraid I'm not a good enough leader that they'll follow me. If I stand up and say, look, God's going to be with us, but he said no spoils, so let's don't take any spoils because we want to honor God. If I say that, they won't go and I won't win and I'll lose respect. And because he was so afraid of what they would think of him and that they wouldn't follow him, he was afraid that he wasn't a good enough man, a good enough leader, that he couldn't do it because he was afraid and he didn't trust God. I don't think he ever gave the command. And then the men, they just went in the battle and they did what they always did. We win the battle and then we take some and we devote some of it to God. They actually are, I think, going to sacrifice it to God. They actually are going to give it to him. And then the rest we keep to themselves. And because he was so afraid, Saul's fear got the best of him and he missed the opportunity. Do you know what he missed? Do you know what was hanging in the balance for Saul? What was hanging in the balance, and you might miss this if you don't, again, know the whole story of redemption, is Saul was the first king. He could have been the greatest king of Israel if he had just trusted God. Theoretically, Saul could have been the one through whom the Redeemer was brought in the world. And we'd be talking about Jesus, son of Saul, not Jesus, son of David. Saul's lack of trust in God, his fear, caused him to disobey God. He would not trust God. He gave into his fear. It clouded his thinking. His fear led to disobedience, and his disobedience caused him to miss out on what his life could have been. And eventually, here's the personal consequences for Saul. Saul goes from there, and he's so tore up in the guilt and shame of what he's done, and because God's now rejected him, he goes out and he's convinced, I'm going to win all these battles, and I'm going to rid our country of these enemies, and I'm going to go out and fight. And his fear and shame eventually begins to drive him a little bit crazy. And a guy who's brought to help him fight, a guy named David, who eventually defeats a guy named Goliath, which you've heard about, becomes this great soldier, and he's a great friend to Saul. But Saul's shame and guilt makes him, his fear causes him to be jealous at David. And he begins to hunt David. He turns against David. And eventually they start a war with each other. And Saul gets killed in the battle, but that's not the worst. Before Saul is killed, Saul's son, his family is wiped out. And he dies knowing that his kingdom is over and his family is over. And he's dead, and it all starts because his fear led him to disobey, and his disobedience, it lost him the opportunity of what his life could have been. In that moment, though, his fear clouded him, and he just couldn't see it. Now, here's the bottom line. So if you got lost, listen real close. Here's the bottom thing. When fear of a person or fear of something, when fear of a person or something is in you is greater than your trust in God, it will always cause you to disobey, and it'll cause you to miss out on the opportunity God had for your life. When we fear anything, when we fear anyone, when we fear anything or anyone more than we trust God, then our fear ultimately will result in our disobedience, and we will miss out on the opportunity that God had for us in our life. And the reason that is because fear is about you. It's about me. It's about protecting me. And God asks us to love, and love and fear don't cohabitate. God asks us to love Him and to love other people, and love is about others, and fear is about me. And perfect love will drive out fear in my life. But fear will drive out love for other people and become about protecting me and other people helping me and everybody about me. Fear and love, they don't cohabit very well. They eventually, they drive one or the other out. I mean, if you're primarily driven by fear, or you're primarily this bundle of anxiety, and fear, it's almost impossible for you to be consistently obedient to God, because eventually you'll come up against your fear, and your fear will cause you to compromise. It's impossible to be driven by fear and obedient to God at the same time, because eventually you bump into what you're afraid of, and you give in to your fear, and you put your trust in God on the back burner of your life, and you miss the opportunity. Because fear is about you, and love is about others. And that's why they're in constant conflict, especially in the life of a follower of Christ. Every day. Every day, when we bump up against our insecurities, against our fears, up against one of these, oh, what if I do this? Or what will they think? Or, oh, God, how's this going to work out? Or what about my future? Or how am I going to know? Every day when we bump up against it, when we come in, what happens is we begin to compromise when we give into our fear, and eventually we sin. And when we sin, we miss out on the opportunity. And do you know what the greatest opportunity we miss out on? We miss out on knowing what God would have done if we had trusted Him. For example, you're afraid of intimacy, so you're married and you can't, there's distance between you and your spouse. You love them, but you can't love them completely because you're afraid. You've been hurt, and you'll never be hurt like that again, so you keep that distance, and they sense it. And because you can't trust God to love your spouse, the one command for marriage, love them the way Christ loved you, and you can't do it. So your lack of intimacy grows bigger and bigger as your fear continues to control you, and you pay relationally, and you never have the marriage that you dreamed you could have, that God wanted you to have, because fear rules you more than trust rules you. Or you fear rejection. You don't want to ever be rejected, and because you're afraid what will people think? What will they think if I do this? And they'll reject me if I do that. And so because of that, you allow that fear to lead you to do what you think they want you to do. And what you never see is what God might have done in those arenas if you had just trusted Him in that. Or some of you are afraid of commitment. And because you're afraid of commitment, you wind up compromising morally. You know you shouldn't spend the night. You know you shouldn't sleep with her. You know you shouldn't be there. You know. But you're so afraid of commitment, you can't get married, you can't be with him, you can't pull the trigger on that because you've had a bad marriage, or she had a bad marriage, or you saw a bad marriage, or your parents are in bad marriage, or everybody you know who's married unhappy, and so you just can't commit. You can have sex. I mean, sex isn't the problem, but you're afraid of commitment. And because you're afraid of commitment, you wind up compromising morally. And what you lose is you lose the opportunity to start your relationship the way God designed that relationships that are permanent and lasting the way they start. See, our fear always causes us to disobey, and our disobedience leads us to sin. And consequently, we miss out on seeing what God would have done in your life. And you know what the tragedy is in all of those cases? And the truth is, all of us could tell some kind of story. The tragedy is that we never get to see. We never really know. We never know what God would have done if I just trusted Him instead of what I feared. Because the opportunity comes, and the opportunity goes, and I shrink back in my fear again, and I don't trust God, and now there's relational tension, and now there's guilt and shame, and now there's this division that's caused, and now there are the mistakes, and I mess up my life. And we look back and wonder, what could my life have been if I had just trusted God and allowed my commitment to God? That is, I say yes to God before I know the question. Jesus is the leader of my life. I don't just believe in Him, I believe Him. And I follow Him, no matter where He leads. We look back and wonder, what would my marriage have looked like? What would my kids have been like? What would our family have been like? What would my finances be like? What would the level of guilt and shame in my life, how would that have been different? Maybe I really wouldn't have lost my job the way fear would have told me if I had just done what God wanted me to do. But you never know. You never know. Because the opportunity comes and you gave into your fear instead of trusting God. And here's the thing. Every point of fear is a point of opportunity. Will I be rule by my fear and give in again? Or will I trust God in this situation? And when we give in to our fear, we basically say, God, you are so good and so great, but I'm going to go with my fear. In this instance, I'm going with my fear. I'm going to allow fear to totally control my life. Now, I don't think anybody gets up in the morning and says, fear is great, fear is good, and fear is the Lord and ruler of my life. I totally give my life to fear. I allow fear to control me. I don't think anybody says that. But isn't it true in an area of your life where you give in to fear that you basically say, God, I know the songs we sing, and I know you're powerful, and I know you do great things, and miracles are possible through you. But in this instance, I can't trust you with my family, so I'm going to do what my fear tells me to do instead of trusting you. God, I know you are so powerful, and I know you have done works of miracles in people's lives, but I cannot trust you in my job. So I'm going to do what my fear tells me to do. And I'm going to be driven by it. That's what we do. And when we do, we give in to fear and we miss out on the opportunity. I just ask you, imagine in the story I just told you, the account about Saul. Imagine that you could have been his advisor and that you knew the story, into the story like you do now. And you're standing there with him, telling him as he brings the troops together and he's about to give them orders of where they're going to go. And he's just about to tell them, no plunder, no spoils, do exactly what God says. But he's talking to you and he says, I'm so afraid. I don't think they'll follow me. I don't think I'm going to tell them the spoils thing. I just don't think I can obey God in this instance. Wouldn't you say, no, Saul, you have to obey. You have to do what God says. You don't know, in the balance hangs your kingdom, your life, your son hangs in the balance. Obey God. Because you know the end of the story. In that moment, he rejects God and it cost him everything. Do you know the fear that I have seen cause more people to miss the opportunities of their life that God had for them? You know the fear that I see cause people to miss out more on the life God had designed for them than any other? It's the fear of missing out on life. I mean, it goes like this. I watch people come and the Spirit begins to work in their life and they get attracted to what God wants, and God begins to release sin and guilt in their life, and they publicly commit their life to God, and all along the way they're sensing freedom in life and their life is getting better. And then there comes a point where they butt up against their fear and they know they should say, God, all that I have, all that I am, I trust you with everything completely. But in this one instance, they can't. And when you push on them and you try to find out, why can't you trust God with this? Well, they hem and they haw, and then eventually they say, well, I'm just afraid. I'm afraid that if I commit my life, if I totally give my life in this area, if I do that, then I'm going to miss out on something better in life. God, I do want what you want, and I do believe that you have your best intent for me, but could I just wait until after prom? God, I do want what's best, but could I wait until after college? Could I wait until after I'm married? Could I wait until after I have kids? Could I wait until after I retire? God, I do want to follow you completely, but could I just wait? I want to trust God. But in this instance, I can't say to him, I totally trust him. I don't want to miss out on something I think would be better. And because I'm afraid of missing out on something better, I miss out on what God had for my life. You see how insidious and sneaky that fear is? It's the fear of missing out on something good that causes us to miss out on what was really good. And the tragedy is that the whole time we're standing there debating, God is saying, hey, I'm a good God. I'm like a really good dad that only wants to give good gifts to you. There isn't anything in life good that you're going to miss out on. And I'll tell you, I've never had anybody in 30 years say to me, Ed, I totally gave my life to God. I totally did everything. Every opportunity, I tried to do exactly what he wanted me to do. And I totally messed out on everything good in my life. However, I've had person after person after person say to me, I knew what God wanted me to do. I mean, looking back, I knew exactly what He wanted me to do. I could have told you then that's what He wanted me to do. But I was afraid that I was going to miss out on something better, and so I couldn't commit. And in that moment, I screwed up my life. I took my life on track. I went the wrong way. And now everything's messed up because I couldn't commit my life in that moment. It's the fear of missing out that causes us to miss out on what God has and what's best in our life. See, we have to decide, am I going to trust God or am I going to trust my fear? I'm going to go with my fear. That's what we have to decide, and that's where we're going to start this series. We have to decide, am I following my fears? Or am I following the Father in heaven who only wants what's best for me? So, what is it you fear more than you trust God? What thing, what person, what circumstance do you fear so much that you fear it more than you trust God? Some of you think, well, I don't think I'm afraid of anything that much. Well, let me ask you this way. What is keeping you from saying to God, God, all that I have, all that I am, all that I'll ever be, my future, I commit to you. I say yes to you before you ask the question. What's keeping you from giving God everything in your life, your money, your family, your career, your future? What's keeping you from saying, yes, I trust God with all of that? Some of you, if you'd be honest, you'd say, well, the reason I can't commit my money, the reason I can't commit my job, the reason I can't commit my marriage, the reason I don't commit in that area is because I'm concerned that if I do, then maybe, that's what you're afraid of. You know what you just did? You just named your fear. In that moment where you say, the reason I can't totally commit my kids, I can't commit my family, I can't do that the way God wants, is I'm concerned that if I do, see right there, you named your fear. You know what else you named? You named your Lord and Master. You named the thing you trust more than you trust God. That's why the Bible says the only way to fight fear in your life is not to focus on your fear. It's to take your fear and put it in the proper order beneath your trust in God. Because the answer to fighting fear in your life is allowing God's trust to win your heart. So let me talk to you for a few minutes about next steps. See, every week we don't want this just to be an hour where we come and you focus on this and you know you need to focus on it, but then you don't do anything. So every week we ask you, hey, grab one of these cards, take a connection card, put your name, email address on it, and then on the back we ask you to think about taking a next step. Now, if you're with us for the first few times, maybe the only honest next step that you could take is just to say, hey, I'll come back. I'll be back for week 2 of this Fearless series. I'll continue to learn. And if you put this card in the offering and you check that box, we'll pray that we'll see you next week, that you'll be a part of this. What I'd really like to urge you to do is that maybe you consider that you'd join a series group where we're going to just talk about this in groups, where you could discuss this and other people could help you make this concrete, that you'd check the box that says, I'm going to join a Fearless small group for the next 5 weeks. It's not forever, just for 5 weeks I'm going to talk about that. All of these groups are starting in the next day or two. We'd love to have you do this. Now, if you're already in a semester small group, you're already going to be talking about this Fearless series in your small group, so you don't need to check to join one of these series groups as well. For others of you, you're at a place, particularly for followers of Christ, that you need to publicly, on this, you need to commit yourself to say, I will no longer allow my fear to cause me to say no to God. I will no longer allow my fear to cause me to say no to what God wants to do in my life. I won't miss out on another opportunity. You check that box, and we'll begin to pray for you. See, we'll begin to pray that all of us will allow our lives to be dominated by our love and our desire to trust God. We will either trust in that or we will lead fearful lives that are governed by our worst thoughts, our greatest anxieties, or we will follow the Father who wants His best for us and gave His Son to lead and guide us, who says, if you follow me, you won't miss out on anything good in this life. You'll miss some pain, you'll miss some guilt, you'll miss some shame, you'll miss some relationships that you'll look back at it and wish you hadn't fallen into, but you won't miss out on anything good. If you will allow your trust in me to supersede the fear that's been governing your life, I'll help you lead a fearless life. I'm praying that we'll all get that locked in. Let's bow together. Now, Father in heaven, thank you for your Son who came to give us life and to give us a spirit of love that will drive out the fear and the timidity in our life. I pray for people that are joining in today that are more than they'd want anyone to know. They're governed by their worries and their anxieties and their fears, and they give into it regularly, and they know they're missing out. God, today, help us to say, honestly, I'll no longer allow my worries to cause me to say no to God. I won't miss another opportunity. Thank you for Jesus. In His name I pray. Amen.